workers suffering heat exhaustion is not a work hazard.
It is a public health hazard, and OSHA is limited by what the authority that Congress has delegated it. OSHA has authority to regulate and oversee occupational hazards.
Yeah, standards, right?
Occupational hazards.
Yes. And why would you not think it is not an occupational hazard if someone is being forced to work 8 hours under 120 degrees without getting regular breaks?
And employers are already taking action to
So you believe employers should have the responsibility to this?
What you just witnessed wasn't a debate. It was a clash between emotion and the law, and only one of them stood firm under pressure. In this tense exchange, Ilhan Omar steps in forcefully, presenting a narrative meant to strike straight at the heart. She describes workers collapsing in extreme heat, employers behaving irresponsibly, and Republicans supposedly standing by without taking action. The imagery is powerful, the tone is dramatic, and the message is framed in a way that makes disagreement seem almost immoral. But this is where the tone of the conversation changes, when she pushes the issue further, insisting that heat exhaustion should be formally recognized as a workplace hazard under the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. She appears to expect a straightforward answer that supports her argument. Instead, what she receives is something far more challenging to her position, a measured explanation. No raised voices, no political theater, just a clear reference to the law.
Are being threatened by an unelected billionaire. When critical government services and authorized funds are being disturbed at a whim. When worker protection, basic safeguards against unsafe working conditions and employment discrimination are being undermined. We are already hearing reports that the Trump administration has begun firing many workers at the Department of Labor and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Ranking Member Scott and I recently sent a letter to HHS demanding more information about these staffing cuts and grant distributions. We have not heard anything back yet. Dr. Sherholz, I want you to help us understand how these attacks on critical agencies will impact worker safety. What does it mean for workers if these agencies lose significant numbers of federal employees?
What OSHA does is protect workers' health and safety by passing laws, by passing regulations, publishing regulations, enforcing those regulations. When they have less personnel, they will be able to do that less effectively. America's workers will be less safe on the job, full stop. The Wage and Hour Division, for example, they enforce wage protections. They make sure, their workforce has already been shrunk dramatically, so their low-wage workers today lose tens of billions of dollars a year in the form of wage theft by their employers, employers not paying minimum wages that they are owed, not paying overtime that they are owed. We cut Wage and Hour Division, and that skyrockets even further. Workers will be hurt by actually being hurt on the job and by losing wages that they were legally owed.
Yeah. And who really benefits when agencies lose this capacity?
Okay. The people who benefit are bad apple employers. They benefit because they are able to cut corners on worker safety protections. They're able to cut corners on actually paying their workers. They just don't have as much oversight over what they do. So bad apple employers gain over workers. Bad apple employers gain over lawful employers because then they are in a competitive advantage over lawful employers. And then the other group that benefits from this are the wealthy who are going to be the disproportionate beneficiaries of the tax cuts that these kinds of agency cuts are going to help pay for.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I have to say, these attacks will have, as you just said, real and devastating consequences for working people in this country. It's about thinking about economic mobility. It's about thinking about job security. It's, at minimum, thinking about institutional stability. And what we are witnessing that is taking place in this country really is something that I find very outrageous and shameful. And I'm glad that we are having this conversation. I hope that we get to have many of these conversations. And lastly, before I yield back my time, Mr. Molino, Ms. Molino, why do you believe workers suffering heat exhaustion is not a work hazard?
Excuse me. It is a public health hazard, and OSHA is limited by what the authority that Congress has delegated it. OSHA has authority to regulate and oversee occupational hazards.
Yeah, standards, right?
Occupational hazards.
Yes. And why would you not think it is not an occupational hazard if someone is being forced to work 8 hours under 120 degrees without getting regular breaks?
And employers are already taking action to protect workers.
So you believe employers should have the responsibility to decide who dies and who survives in the heat?
They have a responsibility to keep their workers safe, most definitely, but that is separate and apart from
So
OSHA's
you're saying
authority.
those employers who have not done that, who have seen people die at their workplaces in places like Texas, it's just because they're bad people and we shouldn't have the responsibility of protecting the workers, is what I hear.
That's not what I'm saying, but thank you.
The doctor explains it plainly. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration doesn't have unlimited authority. Its power is defined by Congress, and it can only regulate areas that lawmakers have specifically authorized. That means there is an important legal distinction between a broader public health concern and a workplace hazard. And that distinction cuts straight through the emotional framing of the argument. Because the debate isn't really about whether extreme heat is dangerous. Everyone agrees that it is. The real question is about authority. Who has the power to regulate it, and how far that power should extend? So instead of directly addressing that legal boundary, the conversation shifts. Disagreement is reframed as cruelty. The implication becomes, if you don't support this position, then you must believe employers should decide who lives and who dies. But that isn't a legal argument. It's a rhetorical trap. It corners anyone who disagrees, forcing them to either accept the premise or risk appearing indifferent to human suffering. It's a familiar political strategy. Transform a policy disagreement into a moral accusation. But the doctor doesn't take the bait. He calmly returns the discussion to the facts. Employers already have legal responsibilities to protect workers. Yes, there are bad actors in every industry, but the existence of those cases doesn't automatically justify expanding federal authority beyond what the law allows. And that's the moment when the dynamic of the conversation shifts. The audience is no longer just hearing an emotional appeal. They're confronted with the underlying issue. The debate was never solely about worker safety. It was also about whether a real and urgent problem should be used to justify broader regulatory power. The expectation may have been a viral moment, a sharp headline, a simple narrative of workers versus an uncaring system. Instead, what emerges is something quieter but far more revealing. A careful, methodical explanation that highlights the difference between how an issue feels and how the law actually functions. That's why the exchange resonates. There are no personal attacks, no shouting matches, just a steady focus on the facts. Because sometimes the most effective responses aren't the loudest ones,